my fellow adopters, foster carers and those who are interested in childhood trauma. My name is Nairi. This is Fly Little Birds and I have 2 adopted sons and used to be a foster carer. So today I'm going to talk about that really difficult question that sometimes comes up with children: who is my real family? And I'm going to talk about my experiences because this question came up probably about 3 months ago with one of my sons. We were just going to go to bed and he said, this is what happens, isn't it, when they're just about to go to bed. He said, who is actually my real mum? Now this course could apply if you're a father as well. So when I'm saying mum in this video, if you are a dad, a single dad, or a couple of dads that have fostered or adopted, then I'm talking to you as well. So when they say to you, who is my real mum, who is my real dad, then they're really saying, where do I place my affections? How do I compare myself to children at school, because mine are at school, who have birth mums or birth dads? And actually I don't. I have you, but my birth mum is still around, is still alive. So who actually is my real mum? So the first thing I want to say is sensitivity is the order of the day. Obviously, I mean, that, I guess that stands to reason that you're going to have to be very sensitive about it. So when my son came out with this question, I wasn't offended by it, but I kind of was surprised that he hadn't worked out in a way that we were both his mum or his mom, we were both his mum, but actually because he was living with me and the adoption was finalised, then I was his real mum. Because after a while when I was thinking about that, I was thinking, but is that right to say that? Am I actually his real mum? Because his real mum was his original mum, his birth mum. That's his real mum. It's all about who is acting as the mum at the time, who is providing the care, the affection, the attachment. So there could be anybody that's the real mum, the birth mum. But actually, if that birth mum is not playing a part in that child's life, because children are they're very immediate, it's very much important what's happening here and now, that actually it's easier to explain to them that the person who they're attaching to, the person that they have a relationship with, the person that they're loving, the person that's providing for them every day is their real mum, because they're the real mum or dad right now, as it happens now in time. Now, where that is going to change, of course, is if you have an open adoption, and this is going to become much more difficult for you. Now, in the UK, we really don't have that many open adoptions. So for the most part, I'm talking about my own experience where it's a closed adoption, not necessarily by our choice, but for the safety of the children. So we only have letterbox contact, so it's a bit different for us. But in an open adoption, I guess you are going to talk in terms of birth mum and adopted mum, but you still, if you are the provider of the main amount of care, and it's more about visiting the birth mum and keeping in touch and keeping her in the loop, or the dad, then it's okay to say you're the real mum. It's okay to say that, because at that time the child is having a home with you and the child is having their affection and their needs met by you. So you are acting in a mother capacity, or you're acting in a father capacity. The thing is about motherhood or fatherhood, it's about something that's active. It's not a passive thing. So you can have something by name only. You can have an uncle by name only. You can have a friend by name only because you've lost touch with them. But in reality, when you sit down to think about that friend, you realise that if you were to call them in a time of need, they wouldn't be there for you. They're not going to act as a friend because really you haven't been in touch for the last 3 years and you don't have that sort of relationship where you can call on them anymore. And so I think it's okay to look upon motherhood and fatherhood as something that is currently active, and you'll see how that's important later in the video when I explain to you when things may change a little bit. Of course, the sensitivity still comes into the fact that you say to them that your birth mother or your father, your birth father, will always be your birth mother, and birth father will always play an important part in your life, will always be part of your family tree, even if legally you're not part of that family tree anymore, because obviously through adoption you're not legally under that family anymore. And that's something that maybe you can explain to a child that's a little bit older, but again I'll explain a bit more about that in a minute. But you still have to hold the birth family in high respect and esteem, no matter what's happened to your child through them. This is something that's very hard for new adopters to get their head around, and when you first adopt, you just want to cosset the child, protect them from everything that may have happened to them. Reality is that you still have to hold that birth family in high esteem, just because they are the birth family, they did give life to the child, and therefore you don't want to be running them down. You don't want to be majoring on the negatives, and you certainly don't want to brush everything under the carpet and pretend that they don't exist. Now, this is where we're going to bring in fostering as well. The hard fact is that some children, not all children, will go back and seek out the birth family regardless of what's happened to them. However horrible it is, regardless of what's happened to them. I know this from experience. I've seen this happen. So you have to hold on lightly to the fact that for the time that you're caring for them in the home, you are the real mother, the father, even in a way as a foster carer. So lots of social workers get very upset about children calling foster parents a mother or a father, but the reality is children just think about now. They think about the relationship they have, and if it looks very much like a mother relationship or a father relationship, then to that child at the time you are their mother or father, even if that child as a foster child is forced to call you auntie so and so, granny so and so, or by your first name. They could be calling you by the first name, but they're seeing you in action as a mother or father, and it doesn't matter what a social worker says, that's how that child is seeing you. So if the child does slip into calling you mum or dad, if you want to correct them, fine, but they're doing it because that's how they're seeing you, and they may also be doing it because other children in the family are calling you mum or dad. So say you've adopted some of them in the family, or you have birth children in the family and they're calling you mum or dad, but you're expecting somebody else in the family that you're treating with as much respect, trying to attach to, you're expecting them not to call you mother and father. If you get the same question from a foster child, it's going to be more difficult to explain because your role is much more temporary in the main. Of course, you may end up being a long-term foster carer or foster parent for that child, in which case it will still look different. But you will need to say to them that for the time, you can be seen to them like a mum, like a dad, because you're going to care for them in that way, and you're going to give them everything they need like a mother or father, as long as they understand that there will be somebody else at some point. Now, for a young child under 2, you can't even explain that. You can't even explain that, so you just have to do the job. But for a child that you can explain to, you just explain that at some point they will have another family, whether that be back to the birth family or whether that be to a new family. But right now you can be their mum or dad to them. They may call you something different, but you're going to act like that for them. So you're the real mum and dad right now. Now again, that might be controversial, but the reality is you are, because they know nothing else and they can see nothing else, and they can't see that far into the future to know that there's going to be any other safety. So the reason why you have to be very careful to be respectful of the birth family is because some children will move forward and they will want to build a strong relationship back up with a birth family. Now, if that has been an abusive situation, that's really, really hard to take, but that's not always the circumstances as to why birth family have to give up their children or why children are taken away. But some children will be very, very curious and they will want to gravitate back to their original birth family. Even if they've been adopted for a very, very long time, they might want to do that. The reality is, especially with foster children, if they've been in long-term foster care, but also with adopted children, that they may end up being closer back with their birth family. That's very hard to hear as an adopter, I'm sure, but it can happen. But let's look at the more obvious situation where this will happen, and that is if you pass away before the birth family do, or the birth mother or father do, or if you end up being unable to care for them in some way, and the option for them is to have that care given to them by their birth family, then that family, whether it be the birth family or a foster family that was there before, will then become the active role as the parent, will then become the active role as the provider, as the person that they are trying to build a relationship, as the unit where they feel safe. And so in that situation, you are no longer the real mother or the real father, because either you're not there or you can't provide for them anymore. Say, later in life you have a serious disability, or they just want to gravitate back to all that birth family and they don't want to be around you anymore. The relationship breaks down. So even if legally you are the family, the adoptive family, then actually the birth family become the active parent, become the real parent again, and the whole shift and dynamic changes. Now, I don't want to frighten you about that if you're a new adopter, because I mean that if you've got a good relationship with your child and you are able to provide, then you will carry on being the real mum, the real dad, the legal parent anyway. But it can happen the other way. So let's talk about legality. So as an adoptive family, you're going to be legally the parent. So you could say to the child, well, I'm the real mum or dad because legally no one else can be. You cannot be taken away from me. Now, in our family situation, that's something that my boys did want to know. They always want to know. They cannot be taken away from us because they did have an adoption breakdown and they were fostered by us. They had an adoption breakdown and they came back to us. So over and over again, they've wanted that reassurance that the birth family or even the adopters where it didn't work cannot come back and take them. And the only way that I've been able to assure them of this is the fact that legally on paper, they are within our family tree. Their rights to us as children are exactly the same as our birth children, because we have 5 birth children, and that becomes very apparent, of course, when you write wills or you look at what your inheritance is going to be. That's going to be shared out between 7 children, not 5, and then these 2 are not as important or they're different from the others. So it's important for them to know that legally they cannot be removed and that legally we are their real parents. So this is where you wouldn't try to explain that to a younger child, and where some children would not be ready to hear that, and sometimes you may not want to go down that route because it's so confusing for children. But for our boys who are entering teenage, can begin to understand that there are things in this world that are legal, and things in this world that just happen, then telling them that legally they belong to us is another route to go down with them. But of course they want to explain to their friends who is their real mum, who is their real dad. And so my explanation to my son was, yes, you have a real birth mother and father and they will always be there, but right now we are your real mum, your real dad, and legally you cannot be taken away from us. So actually this is where it's at. But I had to be very sensitive, as I've said before in the video. I hope you've enjoyed that, and if you have, please subscribe, give me a like. I'll link some playlists at the end for you. I think I might list the attachment playlist for you where it talks about different styles of attachment so you can get into the channel, and I'll see you on my next video. Thank you.